In this Webflow tutorial, I'll teach you how to embed SVG icons on your Webflow site. So you can see right here in the footer with a bunch of social media icons. Perhaps on the CTA buttons, we have these arrow icons. And you can see in the client portal on the top right, this specific website has a user icon. So before we jump into SVG and how to do it, why even use an SVG icon? Let's quickly discuss 3 steps to actually add an icon. The first one is we're probably all familiar with, adding some sort of image. So that's JPEG or PNG. The main pros and cons of this, specifically cons, is the fact that this file size is a bit large, believe it or not. Yes, you can compress the images, and yes, you can change the aspect ratio to fit. However, besides the large file size, we could also add a hover state. Let's just say, for example, we can add a filter, and we can change the filter to be invert. So that way, if you hover your mouse over this Google icon, it has some sort of inverting effect. But that's very limited. So the next step or the next option is to use some sort of font. So in this case, I'm using Font Awesome for these specific icons, which I've done a tutorial in the past. And you can see with these specific font, we can actually target the specific color of the font. So we can change the font color to, let's say, a purple, and we can go ahead and change the hover color to, let's say, a red right here. And you'll notice if I hover my mouse over it, it's listening to that specific CSS hover state. And that's because it's a font, right? And the main benefit of this is that we can actually use the specific color. But the main cons of this is, for example, it's limited to whatever's in the font file. So I'm using Font Awesome right here. You can see if you want to use a very specific icon or a custom icon, you won't be able to do that because it's only limited to a library. Furthermore, this is still, while smaller in file size than the image typically, it isn't the smallest file size. The best option, or one of the best options to add to your toolkit, is using SVG embeds. So right now, this is actually an embed of an SVG, and this is very, very lightweight, and it loads really fast, and we can still target this specific embed itself by changing the color, and we can also target the hover state to change it to whatever we want. So this is very, very versatile. Let me go ahead and explain how to do this. So the first step is to get your SVG icon and open up it in a design file. In this specific case, I'm using Figma. We can get SVGs through many ways. One is a free website called iconfinder.com. If you just type in whatever icon you want, you can see that we can actually download it in SVG. Obviously, if you're an artist, you can go ahead and build anything through Illustrator, for example, and you can still use the SVG. But once you have this specific icon, you'll notice with the SVG file, as discussed in my previous tutorials, these are all scalable, so it won't lose quality. That's another great pro. Where if you have an image, that's set to that aspect ratio, and then if you expand it, it's going to become blurry. So right now in Figma, what I can do is I can go ahead and hit right click, and I can go ahead and hit copy, paste as, and go ahead and copy it as SVG right here. Now we head back into Webflow. We can go ahead and add an embed code or code embed right here. Go ahead and paste in our code, and you'll notice this is what the code looks like. Typically, if it's a very simple icon like I just have, we can go ahead and manipulate this specific code even more. So it actually says width is 326 pixels or 328, and the height is 308. And it also says that the fill is in black. So we can actually change the width instead to just be 100%. So that way it listens to the parent. We can change the height to also be 100%. And we can also change the fill color to be current, capital C color, spelled exactly like this. Hit save and close. And obviously we want to give our class a name. So let's just say house icon. And then from here, we can manipulate this SVG how we want, because we set the height and width to be 100%. We also set the current color, instead of being a black, to be current color. So we can actually manipulate it. So right now, for example, we can change the width to be 3 rems, and we can change the height to be 3 rems. And we can also change the color. Let's just say from this black to this red. How cool is that? Now we can also add a hover state right here. And let's just say when this is hovered, we can go ahead and change it to be, let's say, this specific color. So now you notice if I hover my mouse, it changes to this specific color. This is fantastic to use. I guess the only downside of this specific method is that you'd have to change the width and the height and the fill every single time. So that's why I recommend putting everything in a library, which I have not been doing myself, but hopefully I'll do in the future. And you can just copy and paste it throughout. So for example, if we go back to this website, you can see where it says follow us on socials. These are all done through SVG icons. We can just copy this specific component and just paste it throughout different Webflow projects because it's really just exact same code. So I hope you guys found this video very, very helpful. SVG is a fantastic alternative to either an image or a font-based solution. And on top of this, based on my experience, it provides the fastest load speed out of all of them. You can imagine a font file actually requires the browser to load that font, and then obviously an image requires the browser to load that image. So I hope you guys found this video is very helpful. Check out more of my free Webflow tutorials right here. I'll see you guys in the next one.